It is truly my pleasure to introduce to you today our commencement speaker for the summer 2014 exercises, Professor Charles E. Richard. Professor Richard is a Louisiana native who earned his undergraduate degree in creative writing at Georgia State University in 1990 and immediately returned to his home state. By the time he earned his graduate degree from LSU, he was an associate producer on a one-hour documentary, An American Utopia, which PBS distributed nationally in 1996. In addition to a host of commissioned film projects, he has written, directed, and/or produced more than a dozen documentaries through Louisiana Public Broadcasting centered on Louisiana culture and history. His 2003 book, Louisiana, An Illustrated History, now in its third printing, is a companion to a documentary series he wrote for LPB celebrating Louisiana's bicentennial. Louisiana, a History, based on years of research, received a host of awards, including an Emmy, an Alfred I. DuPont Columbia Award, 7 Telly Awards, and a New York Film Festival Award. The series is LPB's most prestigious work to date. Professor Richard is quick to acknowledge that the projects he undertakes are collaborative in nature and that filmmaking is an interdisciplinary enterprise he relishes. In 2005, UL Lafayette recruited Charles Richard to design and implement a film program. Under his leadership, cinematic arts students have produced award-winning documentaries shown in the U.S. and at the Cannes Film Festival in France. Please join me in welcoming the Joseph P. Montiel Board of Regents Endowed Professor in English and the 2014 Distinguished Professor Award recipient, your summer 2014 commencement speaker, Professor Charles E. Richard.
I'd like to begin by thanking the university for inviting me to share a few thoughts with you here today. It's a great honor to offer this address. So, now what? That's what I was thinking when I put on these robes for my final commencement exercises in 1993. I had earned my terminal degree. Terminal. Sounds more like a diagnosis than a degree, doesn't it? So what was I supposed to do now? Apparently my mother and father were not nearly as baffled by that question as I was at the time. Go get a job is what they proposed. But the truth is that after graduation, I really found myself at a complete loss. I had no idea what to do with myself anymore now that school was finished for me. You see, I loved learning, and it didn't matter what, anything. By 1993, I voraciously devoured 8 years of elementary education, then chewed through 4 in high school, feasted on another 4 in college, and then graduate school, where I gorged myself on as many different courses in as many different disciplines as I could, until my fellowship ran out. And the university pushed me out the door wearing this funny hat. And at this point in my life, formal education was all that I knew. And that's probably true for a lot of you here today as well. But I'm here today to warn you, don't confuse education with learning. A formal education is a wonderful thing. My parents made sure that we got the very best that they could afford, and I thank them for it. You better thank yours too. But an education is not the same as learning. Now, I know this for one reason, because as a professor now, I've watched more than a few kids pay their tuition, pass their tests, put on the same funny hat, pick up their diploma, and I can tell you without a doubt in my mind that in 4 years' time, many of them didn't learn a damn thing. I'm sure you've known a few of these kids yourself. After graduation, I went home, hung up my cap and gown. I was finished with school. But when I woke up the next day, I was still hungry. And I decided that for me, there was still a whole lifetime's worth of learning ahead of me. Now, school makes it easy because it gives learning a structure, a step-by-step formula for making it happen. But now that I'd graduated, I'd have to create that structure for myself, and that's not easy. Eventually, I arrived at what I thought was a pretty clever solution. I became a writer and filmmaker. Now, of course, this went largely unnoticed by my family for a long time because, as it turns out, writers and filmmakers bear an uncanny resemblance to the unemployed. But the great thing about being a writer or a documentary filmmaker is that you're given license to be a student again, a student of anything. Your mission in life is to pick a topic that interests you, research it relentlessly, learn as much as you can about that topic, discern some meaningful truth about it, and then turn it into something beautiful so that others will want to learn about it too. And if there's any secret at all to lifelong learning, I think it's this: recognize your teachers. I'll say it again, recognize your teachers. Now, of course, when you're in school, they're easy to spot. Your teacher is usually the neurotic one standing at the front of the room doing all the talking. But once you're out of school, once you've set out on a journey of lifelong learning, recognizing your teachers becomes much more tricky. They come to us in unlikely disguises, and often it's our educated pride that keeps us from perceiving who they really are. I'll finish today by telling you about my current teacher. His name is Edward Cavelier. He's an 85-year-old man who lived on a houseboat in the middle of the Atchafalaya Basin from about the 1920s until sometime in the 1970s, when the Army Corps of Engineers came along with their levees and told Mr. Edward that he'd have to move his family onto dry land. There was once a surprising and very vibrant culture of people who lived amidst the waters of the Atchafalaya Basin like that. Not anymore. The Corps of Engineers offered to relocate Mr. Edward along with the other folks living out there. Thanks, but no thanks. That was their response. Instead, the Caveliers and their neighbors got together with some big ropes. They tied them to the front of their houseboats, and they hauled their homes up one side of the levee, over the top, and down the other. They lined up their houseboats in rows on dry land not far away, and this became the settlement that we know today as Miette Point. Some of them are still there, along with their kids and grandkids today. You can learn an awful lot from the sheer, stubborn integrity of people like that. Lessons about self-reliance and the value of home and heritage. Recognize your teachers. Mr. Edward is the central figure in the documentary film I'm currently producing. It's called In the Mind of the Maker. And I hope that some of you will take an interest in it and maybe look it up on Facebook. Edward Cavelier is a remarkable man for many, many reasons, but one of them is that he's among the very last of the old-time craftsmen who still remember how to build traditional Louisiana boats. Shapely, elegant boats that are more akin to art than carpentry. The Atchafalaya Basin is home to some extraordinary boat designs that you won't find anywhere else in the world, mostly undocumented and on the verge of being lost forever. Mr. Edward still remembers how to build them. But what makes him really, really special is that he doesn't just build these boats the ordinary way. He uses no blueprints or plans or even any recorded measurements, really. He doesn't need them. Instead, he just looks and he thinks. He remembers and he imagines. And after a while, he's able to construct in his mind's eye a complex three-dimensional image of the boat that he wants to build. So perfectly proportioned, so precisely detailed, that his hands simply give shape to what's in his head. So why does this make Mr. Edward an important teacher? Well, I told one of my colleagues at the Light Center about our boat builder. Light is the university's high-tech 3D visualization center, as many of you probably know. When my colleague responded as a scientist, he said, "You mean we built a $28 million supercomputer center to do what this old man does between his ears?" And that's exactly right. It's what he does. Old-time Cajun boat builders like Mr. Edward, they possessed a certain capacity for visualization and spatial thinking that often eludes even trained maritime engineers. Let me introduce you to him with a short clip that'll give you a little impression about his character and that of his son, Larry. Can we roll that?
But when you build a boat, it never leaves your mind. You're always looking at it, you're always thinking about it, you're always picturing it in your head, you know, what you want to accomplish. At the end, it all comes together.
You just picture it in your mind how it's going to look, and that's the way you build it, the way it's in your mind. A lot of people build everything with a pattern. You know, that's easy to build with a pattern, but you can build it in your mind. Your brain is a computer, and that's what you use. I was born in 1928. That makes me 84 years old. There's nobody built a boat like it. Every boat you see is different.
We're a kid, you can always tell who's coming out of the river, even though you don't recognize them, by the shape of the boat and the way it's riding on the water and the sound.
I call a good boat is a pretty boat, something that's nice to look at. You know, you look at a woman, you want to see a good-looking woman, you know.
And every time somebody passes, they gotta put their hand on it and touch it. The wood's alive.
When you build a skiff, you have to build on it a little while, and then you have to stop and look at it, and just think about it a little while. Something strange about building a skiff, it's almost like you have to put your soul into that boat when you build it.
So that's what our documentary film, In the Mind of the Maker, is ultimately about. It's much more than just boat building. It's concerned with how the brain is able to construct sophisticated 3D mental images, the phenomenon of imagination, memory, visualization, the science behind creativity. So let me put it another way. After a lifetime spent in the swamp, with no more than an 8th grade formal education, Mr. Edward Cavelier is teaching us about cognitive neuroscience. Recognize your teachers. Now, today may mark the end of your formal education. Please, don't let that stop you from learning. Thank you.